are going to go to the next panel right away. And the next panel examines the topic of security policy in the Baltic Sea region. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has a significant impact on security in Europe, especially in the Baltic Sea region, where Russia's activities has been a cause of concern. With Finland becoming NATO's newest member and Sweden on its way, if it goes right, what does the future hold for the Baltic security? So we have some panelists to discuss this matter. First, Thibault Muzerguez, Senior Advisor and Head of the Rome Office for the International Republican Institute. We have Aron Emilsson, Member of the Swedish Parliament for the Sweden Democrats and the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. We have Otto Tabuns, Director for the Baltic Security Foundation. And Adam Starzyński, politician, journalist, and for 3Cs Europe. Okay. And to moderate this panel, who brings his own chair, we have Arvid Hallén from Oikos.
Seems I can never get off the stage. So, I think we'll start by having each panelist perhaps would like to say a few words on the current situation. Maybe Otto, perhaps you would like to start?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to bring very warm greetings from my country, from Latvia, right across the sea. And I think it is particular to bring up that point because I think it was peculiar to many of us to hear and listen that as in many countries, there are some people who would perhaps overlook or underappreciate their own culture, as I think was the case when we discussed the situation in Sweden. So I think I can certainly abuse this situation and use my role as a representative of Latvia to suggest that if they would overlook the presence of their own culture in their own country, then of course we can invite them to come and see the Swedish culture that we have preserved and respect also in our country, such as the Swedish Gate in Riga, which used to be the largest city in Sweden during the time of great powers, as well as of course the University of Tartu, which was part of the Swedish Livonia and was also established at the time when it was found important that at the time of Enlightenment education is very important, and that is also part of identity, the development of language, the development of the broader aspects of life. So with that regard, I'm of course not narrow-minded. It is not only an invitation for those who would underappreciate their own culture, but of course for every one of you to come to our beautiful countries. But of course, as I would like to wish to continue, and that we have to talk about some of the more darker aspects of the regional situation. And of course, with neighbors that we have, it is unfortunately never boring. We know that very well in the history of the Baltic states, that could have their moment now to tell many in the world that, you know, we told you so, because we experienced what many of the things what are now being repeated by the Russian government and the Russian army in Ukraine. Some of even if we would get away from adjectives and subjective matters, just the commonly accepted rules of civilized nations, the international humanitarian law, the international human rights, all of what we see violated, and what is certainly shown as a valid threat and something that we were trying to prepare against. And I think it also one of the reasons why Ukraine had such a destiny similarly to Georgia was exactly this sort of an isolation and sort of a lack of a broader strategic approach, including that of collective defense and cooperation among like-minded nations with regard to the ability to fight against challenges to freedom, challenges to democracy, challenges to individual liberties, which, as we can see, Russian government has mounted not only outside in the region, but also within their own country, starting from this broad authoritarian leadership. On the one hand, great overregulation of the economy, a very arbitrary approach to property rights and other basic freedoms. At the same time, these manual interventions and other ways of manipulation that are, of course, there just to keep the same government and the same regime in power. That was the way how they, as a successor of the Soviet Union, did it during the Soviet time, the Soviet occupation, and we know that unfortunately too well, but that is certainly a threat. So not only on the military aspect, but also on those processes and those aspects where they are really trying to engineer not only their own society, but also try to engineer the ones around them so that it would be easier to take them over. In addition to Russia, which is indeed a threat, but perhaps more of a regional threat, then of course we have to mention the role of China, which is a very good partner to Russia. I would not say a friend, because I think China is better in rationalizing the way how to act on the international stage. And so I think it also has then underlined the ways how the Chinese influence has to be noted as an issue in terms of Baltic security, whereas the Russians have put the, I would say, the strong point on the military presence, on physical and active operations, then the Chinese have understood much better than the Russians have that the war is very expensive and perhaps there are other ways how to increase their influence. That has been the case in terms of finance, investment and infrastructure. If you would look at one of the greater parts of interest of them in this region, it has also been the matter of the tunnel, the railway tunnel between Tallinn and Helsinki, which would be the continuation of the Rail Baltica tunnel, the railway, and this tunnel would then open the way to the Arctic region, which of course, as we all know, is of particular interest to China as an alternative way for them to establish international connections in case there would be a conflict with the United States in the South China Sea, and that sea routes would be compromised. And another aspect is also the matter of education. What we have seen is not only the investment in critical infrastructure, but also the matter of education, the way how also the Chinese Communist Party have tried to monopolize the Chinese language teaching in the Baltic states and beyond. And there, of course, it is not only this, let's say, a linguistic and cultural component, enlightenment and economic links, but it is also used for the propagation and apologetic approach to the various policies of the Chinese Communist Party, so as to perhaps show that, you know, you have many problems in your countries, you have many problems in Sweden, in Latvia, you know, you have migrants, you have the European Union where you cannot agree on anything, you have a lot of those things. Look at our model, look at how we are doing. Of course, it is imperfect, but perhaps that could be a better way. Russia tried it before, but you know, with what they did with the military invasion, you know, the rose glasses have been taken away from many people, including those who used to be supporters of Vladimir Putin, mostly because they had not been living under any government of his. But that is certainly something that Beijing is looking at, and I think in many ways Beijing is the better student of what used to be the big brother in Moscow. And so we can see that those are some of the key issues, both in terms of military and conventional threats, but also the way how our societies and economies are affected. And even though we may think that we are certainly not the largest and the wealthiest parts of the world, we do not have perhaps some rare metals or something like that, still we are very interesting to some of the great powers or countries who would like to become greater powers. So that is something that we all have to keep in mind.
Thank you. Adam, maybe you got some remarks to add?
Certainly, and thank you very much for inviting me. I come from another, just like Otto, one of the "we told you so" nations, so to say, as I'm Polish. At least that is how we go by after February 24th last year. However, I was born and raised in Sweden, so I know that when I speak in front of you, I speak to a very different audience compared to when I speak to friends in the Netherlands, in Spain, or in France, where I am aware of the fact that in Sweden, in Finland, people have a very different perception of the Russian threat. They know what it is. Sweden, especially with its experience from the 17th, the 18th century, the Great Northern War, later on the Napoleonic Wars, Finland naturally more recently with the Winter War. They all know what we can expect from Russia. They know the Russian modus operandi. So it is with great pleasure that we now have Finland in the NATO. And it seems like very soon, in a couple of months, we should have Sweden as a NATO ally as well. With the upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius in a few weeks, it will be another good opportunity to take a look at what NATO really is, what function Finland and Sweden will play once in the NATO for Sweden, what function Finland already will play. When it comes to the Baltic Sea, we know that the Finns, they have a large army, a land army that is prepared to counter the Russian threat, both in their country, but potentially also as a protector of the Baltic states. Sweden having an excellent history when it comes to the Navy in the region. They know it very well. They are one of the few countries that produce their own fighter jets. So when it comes to naval and air force power, Sweden is a player that we all respect very much. So it is great to see that the Baltic Sea will finally get the two missing pieces from a Polish perspective, which is the perspective that I will be representing today as I work for the Polish State Development Bank, BGK, which is the main investor in the Three Seas Initiative Investment Fund. And one of these three seas naturally is the Baltic Sea, but the other being the Black and the Adriatic. This Three Seas Initiative is a project that was started after the annexation of Crimea by Russia. The Polish President Andrzej Duda and the President of Croatia, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, got together and decided that it was time for the countries in the region to form an organization that would focus on strengthening infrastructure links in the region. Unfortunately, due to the almost 5 decades of communism that we all had experienced in that region, our infrastructural links were pointing, all the roads didn't lead to Rome, but they led to Moscow, so to say. But there was very little interlinks between our own countries. Because of that, it made us dependent on the overlord in the Kremlin. Now we started working on especially strengthening critical infrastructure, LNG terminals, gas pipelines. This is something that we started working on in 2015, 16, 17. And now it turned out with what has happened since February last year, that it was a very good decision to make. We were ready when the war started. After Nord Stream, the Nord Stream explosions, just the day thereafter, the Baltic Pipe, one of the real flagship projects of the Three Seas, was inaugurated. Also an LNG terminal was built in Gdańsk, in Poland. Sorry, in Świnoujście. The one in Gdańsk is under construction, but soon there will be another one. So we do need to think about the critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. There is a lot that we need to protect. A lot of the Norwegian gas is flowing to Germany, maybe not through the Baltic Sea, through the North Sea, but still to get to the North Sea, you have to go through the Baltic Sea. We in Poland naturally have the problem of Kaliningrad being a highly militarized region that is a threat to us and to the Baltic states as well. It's also causing problems, security issues in the region. With at the start of the war, there was a lot of debates on what type of traffic could go to and from Kaliningrad. Lithuania was very strict in what could pass through. The Russians would flex their muscles, would make their traditional threats. And unfortunately, EU cohesion in that point was a bit weak. Initially, EU took a stronger position. Later on, they told the Lithuanians that it would be a good idea to let through a little bit more of the products that the Russians want to pass through. So when it comes to cohesion in the region, it's also worth mentioning another format that was created after the annexation of Crimea, the so-called Bucharest 9 format. It is made up by 9 countries on the eastern flank of NATO, the 3 Baltic states, the 4 Visegrad states, meaning Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary, and then further down south, Bulgaria and Romania. Now, with Finland and Sweden joining, we're hoping to expand the B9 format. We do believe that the northern flank of NATO is just as important to counter the Russian threat. So whether it will be B11 if we take Sweden and Finland, or maybe include Denmark and Norway as well, that will have to remain to be seen. But nevertheless, we do believe that this region that I represent, the 3 Seas region, it has a very natural partner in the Nordic states. So we believe that you are key for our security, but we also want to be able to provide security for you, because that is what collective defense is all about. And when we look at the military plans, that the military purchases that Poland is making, in the next 5, 7, 8 years, we will definitely be able to deliver on our promises. Just in 3 years, Poland is forecasted to have the largest land army in NATO, in Europe, that is. And this is a change that has been happening very quickly, because just a few years ago, Poland had an army of only 100,000 people. Now it's 160,000 soldiers, and it is projected to be 300,000 very soon. This year we are spending 4.2% of our GDP on military expenditure. So it is even higher than the US at the moment. It is the highest figure in NATO. And this State Development Bank that I am working for is the one that is providing the extra 1.2% or so, as the Polish state budget will provide 3%, but our bank will issue obligations to cover the rest that will be spent solely on purchases of military equipment. So no retirement funds for a retired general, but this is actual hardware that will be used. So I come with the message, you can count on Poland, and we are very happy to have you as future allies. Thank you.
I think one can always really count on Poland. Yeah, and especially I think when one can always count on Poland now, we're in a situation where NATO hasn't really got an eastern flank anymore. The east is the front. So Aron, please.
Well, thank you, and friends and fellow conservatives, also thank you for having me today and to be able to speak for you. And I must say, just it was a blessing to listen to the former previous panel as well, and to hear the reference to Torgny Lohman and Olof Skötkonung, because I tried to tell a bit of that story also for some friends from the US Congress the day before yesterday. We had actually came here last night just from hosting an event with like-minded partners from the US Congress and the European Parliament together with the speaker yesterday and the day before yesterday in Stockholm, talking about just these specific topics as well when it comes to how to build common security policy and strengthen the transatlantic link as well. So I think we'll return to also China and the Indo-Pacific perhaps. But just some introductory remarks from my perspective. I must say that what year we have had, not at least when it comes to foreign and security policy in Sweden. I mean, the elections, the change of government, liberal conservative majority in the parliament, and for me and the Sweden Democrats personally also new positions when it comes to deliver on security and foreign policy in the parliament. It's been, I think we were humble for the task, but also proud of the task. And when it comes to our guidelines or the roadmap for contribute to and provide to the common security and foreign policy in the Baltic region, I must say that I mean, from our perspective, the Sweden Democrats believe in prioritizing our foreign policy, and that we see that our neighborhood are as most important, and thereafter Europe and the world in falling order, so to speak. I used to say that the Nordic countries they are our siblings, and the Baltic countries is our cousins, and together we build this family in the NB8 circle, so to speak, and it's really important to underscore and underline, not at least during these times, these tense times. And I think that also for many years, I mean, the Sweden Democrats has tried to make some wake-up calls also against the other parties in the Swedish parliament, and when we have observed the Russian activity in our region. We have been prepared from our perspective for many years that we need to increase the defense means, we need to increase the preparedness of what development we see in our closest region. This has been manifested in many ways, but one way is the reoccurring Russian strategic exercises in our neighborhood, for example. Another aspect is Russian flights in the Baltic Sea and violation of Swedish airspace. And just before the renewed Russian invasion of Ukraine last February, the full-scale invasion, we experienced a concentration of Russian landing craft in the Baltic Sea, which led to the Swedish military increasing their forces in not at least the island of Gotland. So I mean, from our perspective, I think it's important to underline and underscore that what we also heard, and I would like to echo what also the previous speaker said and mentioned, that I think you have seen the threat, and you have seen the pace threats for quite a long time, and it's important for Sweden to be a part of the NATO alliance, because since not at least December 2021, when Russia declared its sphere of interest, it also covered Finland and Sweden in another frame than before, and that also creates instability for us in another way than before. But I would also like to say and underscore that Sweden will be also a provider and contributor to NATO. I mean, we have, as mentioned, we have some unique assets in our region. We have, not least, I mean, we share a history, we share cultural bounds, ties, we also share our closest geographical region, but we do also have, not least from the Swedish perspective, research, development and production of quite world-unique assets when it comes to the defense industry. I mean, we have now the Archer system supporting the defense of Ukraine during the brutal invasion war of Russia. We have the fight, yes, as mentioned. We have world-leading submarines. We have an air surveillance capacity when it comes to the Global Eye, for example, which could make this northern Arctic flank inside the NATO framework quite strong also for the NATO collective as whole. And that's also what we hear, I mean, in the Committee on Foreign Affairs and with our negotiations and talks together with government, with like-minded partners, that that's the will also from the NATO perspective, that Sweden will mainly focus and prioritize the Baltic Sea region and the Arctic, even though we walk in or enter with this 360-degree perspective to be a contributor to the alliance as whole. But I would say that perhaps to conclude this part, that I think with this ongoing defense commission working among the 8 parties of the parliament, we see that the Sweden Democrats have had huge success in also press the majority and the like-minded partners in the right direction when it comes to not only stop at 2% of the GDP for defense means, which we now will reach, I think, already next year, but also try to go further, as Poland, for example, but at least towards the 3% of the GDP and continue. And this is of importance. And I also think that this has great support of the public opinion. Our security and our existence as free countries ruled by self-determination, territorial integrity, and rule-based system is what is at stake, and also stands against the pace threat that actually China and Russia brings to the global security order, where they will put the rules-based world order at stake and out of the game. So from our perspective, I also think that it's important to underline towards when we talk about the transatlantic link towards the US Congress and the United States, that if we count with the American support in defending Ukraine and beat the Russian evil in this full-scale invasion, we also need to be a trustful partner and a contributor to the security in the Indo-Pacific and in the Southeast Chinese Sea. Because, I mean, the way that Russia is an aggressor towards Ukraine is quite similar the way that China is an aggressor towards Taiwan. And Taiwan is the last bit of the puzzle to complete the communist win for the People's Republic of China after Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and all the other provinces. So this is also at stake, and I think with our capabilities we could be a worldwide provider also, with the focus and the strategics with our cousins and siblings here in the northern Baltic Sea.
Thank you, Aron. Yeah. Now we'll move on to Thibault, and then we'll have something of a discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Arvid, and thanks. I feel that I have a lot of pressure on my shoulders right now, because you have a Frenchman working in Italy for an American organization that's going to talk about Baltic security in Sweden. So I really need not to screw. I'll try not to screw up. I'll actually, maybe I will, because I'm going to start with a rather contrarian view. I would say that right now, the Baltic Sea region is more secure, and it will be in a few weeks, hopefully, even more secure than it has been for the past 10 years. And the truism that what you would answer me is that, yes, we have to thank Vladimir Putin for that. I would say yes, partially. Yes, we need to thank Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation for doing this crazy thing of trying to invade Ukraine, trying to replace his government and get away with it. They are bogged down in a war that is costing them a lot in terms of human lives, in terms of military equipment. Not only them, but it is frankly I mean, the war is not over, and they might still get away with it. And let's do everything we can so that they don't get away with it. But it's clearly not going according to plan. I mean, it's amazing that the Russian propaganda is still telling you today, a year and a half after the start of the 3-day special military operation, that things are still going according to plan. So yes, we have to thank a little bit Vladimir Putin. I think we should thank other people. There are other people responsible for that. I think we should thank Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainian people who have put their lives on the line and who have resisted. I mean, if you remember, Volodymyr Zelensky, we were 6 months after the withdrawal of Afghanistan. Volodymyr Zelensky could very well have done what the Afghan president did, which is to run away. And actually, and I think we should be ashamed of ourselves on this one, we, the European Union, and not only the European Union, we, the collective West, and I'll go back to the collective West in a second, actually offered him a ride. Right, if you remember? Remember what he answered? I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. And he's still asking for those ammunition, and probably we should, when they ask for F-16s, maybe we should be a little bit more quicker in delivering those weapons. That's only a small matter. And then there's another bunch of people that we should thank, and it's you guys. And I would like to here pay homage to the Sweden Democrats, because I've been in politics for 20 years, working for different parties, with different parties. I can tell you it takes guts to admit, not necessarily that you were wrong, but that the circumstances have changed and we need to change policy because those circumstances have changed. So I think you deserve yourselves a good round of applause for doing this, frankly. So the Baltic Sea is more secure now than it's been for the past 10 years, but that doesn't mean that this is going to last. One day, the war in Ukraine will end. Let's hope in the right way, with a complete defeat of Russia. And I say a complete defeat of Russia, which means return to the borders of 1993 or 1992, 1993. But this will not be the end. We know that Russia, old vagabond Russia, as you called it in a publication of IRI that will be out in a few weeks, old vagabond Russia will still remain old vagabond Russia. They will do what they always do, whether they win or they lose. They stop, they regroup, and then they attack somewhere else. Funny fact, which is not so funny, at least for my neighbor here, the territory that is currently occupied by Russia, even though it is a disaster for Russia, the territory that is currently occupied by Russia is bigger than all the Baltic states combined. Right? This is a fact. This is an actual fact. And the capabilities, the naval capabilities of the Baltic Sea Float in Kaliningrad and in St. Petersburg, in Kronstadt, is still the same as it was in 2021. So they still have the submarines, they still have the fleet, everything. The fleet could not go into the Black Sea because the Turks closed the straits to military vessels. So I think it would be a major mistake to believe that because the Russians are in trouble, that we should just like think that everything is okay and we don't need to rearm. So NATO is going to help and into that in making us stronger in the Baltic Sea, stronger in the North Sea, also stronger in the Mediterranean, in the Arctic, and that's a good thing. But it's also, the NATO is the sum of its members, so it is important for all of us to rearm. I think it is important, and it is extremely urgent, not only to supply Ukraine with the weapons that they need to win this war, but also for our own sake. I mean, we are dangerously disarmed at a time in which everybody for the past 10 years has rearmed, right? So we need to be very aware of that, and we need to rearm, and all member states, all NATO member states, need to be involved in this. And I think this is why there are German troops in Lithuania. This is why there are French troops currently in Estonia, because there is NATO is a family, and there is solidarity within this family, and I think it needs to be shown. But I'd like to take just an instant to talk a little bit more about Ukraine, because we mentioned it en passant, so to speak. But I think this is important because Ukraine has changed a lot of things. It changed a lot of things in the Baltic Sea, but also changed a lot of things in Europe in the transatlantic relation, and we kind of discovered or rediscovered ourselves a little bit. If I had talked about the collective West, or even the West a few years ago, my God, what would have I got at that point from the left? Because obviously that would have been a very racist concept. But also, let's be honest with each other, from the right, right? Some people, I'm not saying everybody, but some people on the right have been saying, and this is an old discourse, if you go back to Oswald Spengler in the 1910s and the 1920s, the idea of the suicide of the West, the end of the West, that, this is a a West that is in complete decadence because it has lost its way, is something that was very popular a while ago. And I don't blame people who subscribe to this opinion, because frankly, if you look at everything that happened between 2008 and the withdrawal from Afghanistan, there was much to say about the decline of the West. The 2008, the war in Iraq, the 2008 financial crisis, the migrant crisis of 2015, the Afghanistan withdrawal of 2021. I think there was a lot of there were good reasons to talk about that. But then we realized all of a sudden that, yeah, actually the West is something, and the West is about, when you're attacked, you stand and fight. You don't take the taxi, you go and take your ammunition and you fight. And I think, the Ukrainians have taught us a few lessons. And in many ways, this is some conservatives, I know not you guys, but some conservatives and people who claim to be conservative in my country at least, said, oh, Vladimir Putin is the next, is the real conservative, is the real man, is the guy who is standing for our values. But I would say, what is more conservative than fighting for your own country, fighting for the sanctity of borders, putting your life on the line for your nation, right? There is nothing more conservative. So in many ways, it's a war for, intellectually, this is a war that we support because it is a war that is definitely compatible with conservative. I would say it's even a conservative war with a big C. Maybe a less, I will finish with this, probably less popular opinion. This war in Ukraine has also made us, or made some of us, rethink a little bit about the West, but also about Europe. I'm not saying that, Ukraine is fighting for the European superstate. I think nobody wants to die for the European superstate, probably not even the Eurocrats, to be honest. But this idea, Ukraine has been attacked because it wants to be part of the European Union, not as a superstate, not as a superstructure, but as a cultural ensemble, and I will say it again, if I had said that 3 years ago, my God, as a civilization. The West and Europe as a civilization. That's why they've been attacked, and that's what they're fighting for. That's what they're dying for. And I think we should think about it, not to bitch about the Europe that is now, or the Europe that doesn't exist yet, but about the Europe that we can build, and what conservatives can build. So I think this is something that is a little bit challenging politically and intellectually for conservatives, but I think that's also something we should think about. And I'm glad that the Sweden Democrats and other conservatives are willing to think this through and to play that game. Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini.
Slava. So I'm thinking, if I can, sure. And if you can have some brief remarks, especially I would like to hear your views on what are the main takeaways, the most important lessons we've learned from this war, from this invasion. What should we take away from it, please?
Well, thank you. To start with, I would just like to echo what Thibault mentioned also about the way to be able and prepared to change our minds when the reality changes. Because this has, of course, been a quite huge process for the Sweden Democrats when it came to the new decision and new view on a Swedish NATO membership. But I think what was the core and fundamental principles for us was that we are quite good at, even though when the reality changes, we have an ability to rather change the map after the new reality than the other way around, and also try to let the social conservative and conservative guidelines for the cornerstones of security policy and self-determination be the guidelines, not to be locked by previous positions. And I think it's a strength for our party from our view. But also one more thing. I think that one lesson also learned by this brutal war is that, one is that many had the picture of that this war will be different from historical wars. It will be different from the Second World War, for example. It will be different from previous war in the Balkans. But actually, in so many ways, this war is quite an old school war. Of course, we see the cyber warfare, of course, we see the intelligence warfare, but in many ways, this is a brutal, traditional war, and I think that's one lesson learned, and also an argument for what was mentioned to rearm our forces and also be able to strengthen the resilience and the assets in the long run and the long term for our countries, not the least. And also that China, Iran, and Russia are the trinity which together threatens the rule-based world order, both in Ukraine and in the Arctic region, in the global south. So we need to sometimes also look at this from a broader perspective and see the pace threats which are also threatening the Western civic society all over the world.
Thank you. When it comes to the main takeaways, I agree with a lot what you said. It is a classical war. More than anything, in true Russian style, it is an artillery war. And here, unfortunately, Ukraine has the systems to fire, but it doesn't have the shells to fire. So in many cases, they have to limit what they can do. So naturally, F-16s are very important, but if there is anything we can do to help the Ukrainians, it is to send as many artillery shells as possible. Unfortunately, producing them takes them some time. And when it comes to many aspects of this war, we as the collective West have been a little bit too late. Many of the systems we have sent have been sent after 4 or 5 months when it comes to HIMARS. Later on with Western tanks, which, by the way, Poland was really leading to this formation of this international tank coalition. Now when it comes to the F-16s, Denmark is playing a very important role together with the Netherlands. So some countries, they lead the way in certain weapon deliveries, and then usually the other follow. It would be nice if many of our decision makers could have come to these conclusions after a month into the war. Another important part is that we need to start producing these artillery shells and other weapons now. Unfortunately, we are still waiting with these decisions. I'm not really sure for what, as it's been almost 1.5 years since the war broke out. And to be honest, I do believe that the war will still be going on 1.5 years from now as well. So we need to prepare for what is coming in the coming years. This is also one of the main takeaways. I think that when we will be looking at this war from 15, 20, 30 years from now, it will be seen as the big one, so to say. This is the war that Russia has been preparing for 50, 60 years. All those artillery shells they are firing away now, it is what they produced during the Cold War and never really fired off because the Cold War never really got hot in that sense. So I believe that we need to realize that if we want to protect the international order, we need to step up even more. We cannot be complacent. We cannot pat ourselves on the shoulders and say, look, things are going very well. There is still a threat that the war, it's always important to think about different scenarios, how the war can end. One of them, naturally, the best case scenario is that Ukraine manages fairly quickly to push the Russian forces back and retake all its territories that it was in control of ever since 1991. Another one is a protracted war in which there is at some point a stalemate. The Russians simply can't achieve their goals and they will have to sit down at the negotiation table because that is how all wars practically come to an end. And at that point, Ukraine needs to be in a strong enough position to be able to survive, to be able to have a viable state, to be able to have access to the Black Sea, to be able also to receive help from the West to rebuild their country. It will be enormous amounts of money that will be involved. This is something that we will all have to do. And also, Macron was recently in Bratislava and speaking about what could be the future. It was generally a very good speech. Previously in Central Eastern Europe, he was not always received that well. That speech was received well, but there was one thing that he said that drew some ire in some corners of Central Eastern Europe. He said that we need to start thinking about decreasing the militarization in the region. I believe that if the war ends with this type of stalemate, this is not the time to demilitarize anything in our part of Europe. Ukraine will need all the weapon systems it can get, even in such a scenario. And us in the Baltic Sea region, in Central Eastern Europe, in Northern Europe, we also need to rearm for the coming 10, 15, 20, 25 years, because this is a threat that is not going away. So the main conclusion is this is the big one. In 2008, when Russia invaded Georgia, the world kind of ignored it. In 2014, when the Russians annexed land in Europe for the first time since the Second World War, again, there was a decision made in Germany to build Nord Stream 2 after it. So again, they didn't realize the changes that had taken place. And now in 2022, I'm still not sure whether we have realized that this is the big one. I do still see that in some corners of the West, they do believe that we could return to a business as usual. There could be some form of Minsk III accord with Russia, and that we could go back to making normal business. We could invite the Russians to the table. The NATO-Russia Funding Act from 1997 is still in place, which limits, for example, exactly how much military presence NATO can have in Central Eastern Europe. And as you mentioned, back in December, in December 2021, when Russia started rattling their sabers, they made a very clear statement. NATO out of Central and Eastern Europe, out of Northern Europe, basically go back to Berlin or even further. So the Russians, they are trying to force our international alliances on us, what we are allowed to do, what kind of weapon systems we can have in our countries. This is not something that will go away very quickly. The only way to take care of the problem is by complete Russian defeat. And for that to happen, we need to send as much weapons as possible, but also we need to help them with other issues. Ukraine being in this state of war, it is also a financial war that the Russians are waging on Ukraine. They are waiting and hoping for some form of financial collapse. So far there has been financial aid coming, especially from the US, but also from the European Union. Unfortunately, it is coming a little bit late. If we could speed up some of these processes, it would be of great help. Another conclusion that we should draw is how well prepared we are, apart from military expenditure in our region, military production, also industrial production. We simply lack a lot of the capabilities to be able to build these weapons on the scale that they're needed, because we have dismantled our own industries and sent them far away across the world. These supply chain issues were presented during the COVID pandemic, but this is also something that we can see now, that a lot of our production is taking place in countries that are not prone to come to our aid when we are facing this crisis that we are facing. So the concept of nearshoring is returning, that the US, France, or other large states, they should produce more of their own industrial production in their own countries, but also to locate it in countries that are closely allied with their states. So we need to do it internally in the European Union or in other allied states. But we also need a lot of the weapons now. We cannot wait 3, 4, 5 years for production to ramp up. We need to look across the world and see where do we have allies that might be unwilling to send direct weapon systems to Ukraine, but we can buy weapon systems from them and then send our own weapon systems that we have so we can replace our own. This is something that Poland is doing with South Korea. Last year we decided to buy 48 multi-role F-50 fighter jets. We are buying 1,000 K2 tanks, of which 800 will be produced in Poland. We are also buying self-propelled howitzers from them, around 700. more than 300 MLRS systems. These weapons are in many parts of the world. We do need to try to exert a little bit of pressure to get them to come to us. For example, here, even in Switzerland, there are a lot of weapons that are lying around, but the Swiss are at this point not willing to export them. Right now, there is the debate whether they should send 25 Leopard tanks to Germany or not, which would in turn make it possible for Germany to release 25 of their own Leopards and send them to Ukraine. There are many diplomatic initiatives that we can take around the world and start looking for these weapon systems that are needed, because I am convinced that they will be needed for the coming years. A final point is that we also need to look at our capabilities, not when it comes to pure material, but more on a not spiritual plane. But if we look at our identities, during the Second World War, there was a famous slogan in the US, why we fight. So the question is, why do we fight? For example, when we look at Europe, Finland is the country that has the largest percentage of its population that is willing to take up arms and fight in the defense of their own country. 83% according to the latest numbers. In Sweden, I believe it's somewhere around 50 or 60, if I'm not mistaken. But in many other parts of Europe, unfortunately, it's down to 25, 30%. The question is, where does this pacifism, fatalism, or maybe it is oikophobia? Maybe our populations have been told for years that the nation state is bad. We as the collective West are a group of evil states that have been dominating the world and have never provided anything good. So why should we take up arms to defend our own states? This is something that we need to think about, because when we look at the information space, the information warfare is very strong. We had RT that was broadcasted to many homes across Western Europe and the US for years. I have no idea why we allowed it to happen, but it did. And in various corners of the internet, you can still see these theories that, yes, as you mentioned, Vladimir Putin, the great savior of Christian civilization, who is sending Chechen forces to burn churches in Ukraine. Unfortunately, there are still many corners of Western Europe where they will join forces with those who claim that America and the West are the great evil. So these are the conspiracy theories that we need to fight, and we need to look at ourselves and see how we can strengthen our will to fight.
Okay. Otto, a few brief comments on the big lessons, and then we'll take two very short questions from the audience.
That's right. I think that I can agree to the statement that indeed in the Baltic Sea region we are safer than we have been for a long time, but I would not say that it is because the threat is smaller. I think it is just that we have done our homework and we have prepared so that even if the threat becomes bigger, it is not that we have to sink with it. And perhaps that is also something that we could use with regard to lessons learned from this war, what we could do to prevent the threat from becoming greater than our security. In many ways, this is a simple war, indeed, both in terms of the tactics, the operational approach, the ways of waging war that are not dissimilar to the way how it was done during World War I and World War II. But also this simplicity has also opened our eyes to some easy problems that we have on our side, specifically if we talk about the production and the industry and our capability to provide for ourselves, also militarily. I think it is a significant problem, not only because it is a problem in military or conventional terms, but I think what you mentioned is a key issue why some of the countries in the European Union were hesitant in supporting Ukraine. Not that perhaps they would lack the political will to do so, but in some cases, including some of the major countries, they did not want to show maybe not so much to the world, but more for their domestic electorate, that they may actually not have these capacities or not have these systems or equipment in the first place, so that there is nothing to share, as there was with regard to tanks and with regard to one major country which had a problem even to inventorize whether they have them or not. Then, of course, in many ways it is a complex war, and in some ways it has been one of the most technological wars, especially if we talk about satellite systems, if we talk about GPS, with regard to intelligence that is used to complement this very traditional way of waging war. And that is perhaps also a lesson that we could take, why some of the common investment that we could do also on the European level is useful, so as not to have a situation when as in another major country, so not the one that had a problem with tanks, one of the chiefs of the intelligence service was fired because up until the latest moment there was no reliable information with all the resources that they had as a nation for their intelligence that an invasion is imminent. So this, I think, is another example that there are some issues that objectively we cannot deal with alone, and also with regard to intelligence, with shared investment in such high technologies that would firstly be helpful for us in situational assessment. That would help us to avoid many situations where perhaps assumptions that are based on limited information can cause a lot of problems. We know that it does not work very well in business to take a misinformed decision. And I think we can see what bigger trouble it would provide for us, not only nationally, but also on the European level, with regard to our ability to make decisions. If we talk about autonomous Europe or our own sovereign decisions, for us to be able to make good decisions, we have to have good information. And sometimes you have to cooperate to get even more quality, especially in terms of intelligence.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll open up for two very short questions. Anyone? Okay, one over there.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to open up by saying I think that Poland is setting a really great example, especially President Duda, in taking charge and siding with Ukraine in this very difficult time. And it's good to have alliances, especially that includes Germany, though they don't have as strong leaders and it's not setting a good example this time. But I was wondering about the Bucharest 9, a bit more about what they do and why Ukraine was not a member. I guess it is maybe the same reason as why they were not in NATO, but I was hoping you could tell a little bit more about that.
So do we have a mic?
The microphone is on the run.
Thank you very much.
If anyone has a microphone,
Maybe we can see if there is one more question. We can take both of them at the same time.
Sure.
No, there's no more question. Good.
Well, in that case, the answer is, as you suspected, it is connected with NATO. The Bucharest 9 is an informal group within NATO, which was created after the annexation of Crimea. It was these 9 countries that decided that they needed to put a little bit more pressure on the rest of NATO to realize that after the annexation of Crimea, we can expect more to come from Russia. They won't stop with this. So ahead of the 2016 NATO summit in Warsaw, the group was created and started pushing for a permanent NATO presence on the eastern flank. It resulted in the so-called enhanced forward presence, with these 4 battalions that were located in all 3 Baltic states and in Poland. After the invasion, the full-scale invasion in 2022, this form of cooperation with NATO enhanced forward presence was extended to also include Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovakia. So now we are almost all along the flank or front, as you correctly said, even though saying the Eastern Front makes people quite uncomfortable. But this is also something that we are thinking a lot about how to increase, because a battalion is around 1,000 troops. It is not enough to protect the Baltic states, which have a very difficult geographic location. The only way for NATO troops to arrive to the Baltic states are either by ship, but if we go by land, Then there is the so-called Suwałki Gap, this very tiny piece of land between Kaliningrad and Belarus. So technically, with the Russian army now being in Belarus, they could try to close this little gap and make sure that no help can arrive in time to the Baltic states, which is why after 2022 we are working to increase it to brigade level, so 5,000 troops. But to be honest, it is probably still not enough. Unfortunately, Germany, which in Lithuania was supposed to provide this brigade, they have recently been saying that they cannot leave enough troops, so they want to have part of the brigade being stationed in Lithuania, the other part being stationed in Germany, and if there is a crisis, then within 10 days or so, they could be sent to Lithuania. But this is not really what we want. I think that Estonia's Kaja Kallas, Prime Minister, stated correctly after 2014 that what we should have is that we should have division-sized forces in Eastern Europe. This is also what Poland believes. During the Cold War, West Germany was the main forward presence, so to say, and this is where we still have the majority of all American troops in Europe. So we believe that a division would be needed in Poland and maybe another division that could jointly protect the 3 Baltic states. So the Bucharest 9 is a format that is coordinating cooperation on NATO's eastern flank between these members. Sometimes it's presidents' meetings, sometimes it's defense ministers or foreign affairs ministers. And hopefully this is a format in which we will soon see also the Swedish Prime Minister, defense minister and foreign minister. So we hope that you will join us.
Hopefully. Thank you, the entire panel, for this excellent presentation and discussion. I think we're out of time now, so maybe Denise, you want to add something?
Yeah, let's give them a warm round of applause.
Yeah.
Good job.